Welcome, sentient beings from across the galaxy, to the 100th Intergalactic Games. The announcer's voice boomed through the stadium. The crowd of over 50,000 aliens from hundreds of different planets cheered and applauded. We have an exciting lineup of events and athletes this year. But before we begin, allow me to introduce our defending champions in the quadathlon from the past 69 Intergalactic Games, the Granitians. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause as a group of 12 granite-skinned beings marched into the stadium, their footfalls causing minor tremors in the stands. They waved stoically to the adoring fans. And of course, last year's overall champion in both the quadathlon and pentathlon. Give it up for Grarsh. A lone Granitian strode confidently into the stadium, pumping his rocky fists in the air as the crowd went wild. He was the greatest athlete in Intergalactic Games history, having never lost an event in his long career. The quadathlon and pentathlon had always been dominated by the mighty but slow-moving Granitians. No other species had ever come close to defeating them. Now, for the first time in the history of the Intergalactic Games, we have a new species joining us, making their debut all the way from the tiny, remote planet called Earth in the Milky Way galaxy. Please welcome the humans. A small contingent of 5 humans marched into the stadium, waving and smiling eagerly to the subdued and confused crowd. The lanky bipeds looked laughably fragile next to the towering pillar-like forms of the Granitians. Murmurs and chuckles spread through the spectators at the sight of these newcomers. Who were these gangly, skinny creatures, and how did they possibly expect to compete with the galaxy's greatest athletes? One human separated from the group and did an odd little hopping dance in the middle of stadium, waving his arms and gesturing wildly to the crowd, a huge grin plastered across his face. The audience howled with laughter at his silly antics. Well, folks, it seems the humans have already endeared themselves to the crowd with their unique brand of showmanship. The announcer chuckled. Let's give a warm welcome to Earth's first Intergalactic Games competitors. Scattered, amused applause echoed through the stands. It was clear no one was taking these humans seriously as athletic contenders. As the events commenced, the humans continued their outlandish hijinks, waving signs with illegible alien scribbles, chanting odd guttural sounds, painting strange colors on their mostly hairless bodies. The spectators ate it up, roaring with hilarity at the absurd creatures parading around like fools among the galaxy's elite athletes. Whenever a Granitian competed, the human contingent in the stands whooped and hollered, jumping up and down in a most distracting fashion. The granite beings just shook their heads, ignoring the distracting pests. Finally, the first day of competition drew to a close. As expected, the Granitians dominated, winning gold medals in every event so far. The leaderboard showed the rocky beings far ahead in points, with all other species trailing behind without a single podium finish. The humans were at the very bottom, not having qualified for a single event final and thus without any points at all. Their ridiculous antics continued, however, drawing plenty of attention but no respect. Over the next few days, the human stunts got wilder. They brought bizarre musical instruments and noisemakers, leading rowdy chants and dances in the stands between events. The hyperactive creatures seemed to have unlimited energy, their spindly bodies gyrating and undulating to strange rhythmic sounds for hours on end. The spectators eagerly awaited the humans' next comedic display. Other species began half-heartedly mimicking the odd ritualistic behaviors of the gangly bipeds, enjoying this new form of entertainment. Meanwhile, the Granitians continued their inexorable march toward yet another dominant showing, Grarsh himself having already claimed 3 gold medals. The conclusion of the games seemed a foregone conclusion. No one noticed the humans starting to appear alongside Granitians in event qualification rounds. When the 100-meter sprint preliminaries were held, a gasp rang out from the crowd. A human had qualified for the finals. "Well, how about that, folks?" shouted the stunned announcer. "Earthling John Smithers has somehow qualified for the 100-meter sprint final. This hairless bipe must be faster than he looks." Guffaws echoed through the stadium at the absurd notion. "He'll have his work cut out for him, though the favorites in the race are Granitian legends Grarsh and Bolderon." More raucous laughter from the spectators. Qualifying was one thing, actually competing with the granite behemoths was quite another. The gangly human would surely be trampled underfoot at the sound of the starting gun. In the final, John crouched down into an odd position at the starting line, back arched strangely and gangly limbs angled asymmetrically. The towering Granitians towered over him impassively, waiting for the starting tone. When it sounded, a collective gasp came from the crowd. The tiny human was running and rapidly pulling ahead of the lumbering rocky beings thundering down the track. The audience watched in shocked disbelief as John crossed the finish line first in a blur, punching the air in triumph, well ahead of the stunned Grenetians who trudged in several seconds later. There was a moment of astonished silence before the stadium erupted into frenzied cheers and screams. The first defeat in history of a Grenetian by another species, and at the hands of this scrawny, hairless newcomer no less. John ran around the stadium waving his arms wildly, basking in the glow of the adoring crowd. The Grenetians stared after him in confusion before solemnly heading off stage. In the coming days, more shocking upsets occurred. The human female Mary bested Grarsh himself in the weight-lifting event, hoisting far more mass than her slim frame suggested possible. In the long jump, human Michael outleapt the furthest Grenetian by an improbable distance, his gangly limbs carrying him over 8 meters through the air. The raucous human section in the stands grew exponentially event by event, the ridiculous rituals increasing in elaborateness and cacophony. Other species cheered the plucky newcomers on as one unbelievable human victory followed another. The Grenetians gazed on stoically, though their stony features hinted at growing bewilderment and frustration. Going into the final day of competition, however, the general point standings had Grarsh and the Grenetians well ahead of all other species. While the humans had surprisingly claimed gold in every event they entered, they had not qualified for enough events to match the towering rocky being's total medal count. The consensus was that the Grenetians had already clinched overall victory. The humans had been a shockingly disruptive force, but the rocky giants would still rightfully claim the Intergalactic Games crown yet again. The last event was the grueling obstacle course race, the decathlon, the ultimate test requiring the perfect combination of strength, speed, agility, and endurance. A competitor had to sprint, leap, crawl, climb, lift, throw, conquering 10 diabolical obstacles in succession faster than any opponent. Grenetians traditionally swept the top positions, their methodical power and stamina overwhelming all other entrants. This year would surely be no different. An enormous Grenetian named Bolderon was the odds-on favorite, with Grarsh himself expected to finish a close second. The pair took their positions at the starting line, massive bodies taut and ready. Besides them stood the lean, sinewy form of the human Michael, bouncing lightly on his toes, a look of fiery intensity radiating from his eyes. Spectators laughed and jeered at the foolishness and futility of this skinny creature attempting to challenge the incomparable granite warriors. The starting tone sounded, and the three figures launched forward. Bolderon and Grarsh thundered along ponderously but powerfully, while Michael sprang nimbly like a gazelle fleeing a predator. The crowd gasped as the impossibly nimble human took the lead on the first obstacle, a set of towering steps to be scaled. He leapt from step to step in graceful bounds as if weightless, even as the Grenetians climbed steadily but laboriously behind, struggling to pull their massive weight upwards. In the suspension bridge traverse, Michael again displayed uncanny agility and balance, sprinting lithely across the swaying structure as the burly rockman lumbered unsteadily, struggling to maintain stability under their tremendous mass. The obstacles went by in a blur: sprints, climbs, balances, crawls, and unbelievably, the skinny human maintained his lead throughout, making the most challenging tests of brawn and sinew look effortless. The bulky Grenetians simply couldn't match the smaller being's speed and nimbleness. The crowd was on its feet now, rapt and screaming, willing the impossible for this frail fleshy bipe to somehow defeat the living mountains of muscle and stone. As Michael flung himself triumphantly through the finish banner, the stadium exploded in deafening adulation. He danced about waving his skinny arms as Bolderon and Grarsh thudded across the line far behind, their craggy faces etched in exhaustion and disbelief. No one heard the announcement of the final event standings and medal counts. Michael was hoisted onto the shoulders of the crowd and carried around the stadium in rapturous celebration, the Grenetians looking on mutely as their long reign was finally ended. As the intergalactic anthem played at the closing ceremony, the leaderboard flashed a new name in first-place humanity. The Grenetians were in second for the first time in history. Michael waved happily from the podium top spot to the adoring crowd as Grarsh and his team stared up sullenly from the second level. John and Mary rushed onto the podium waving earth flags, and Michael jumped down to hug them joyously. The three victorious humans danced and laughed together amid the deafening cheers, celebrating the ascendancy of their humble but determined kind. So concluded the 100th Intergalactic Games. A historic milestone heralding the emergence of a surprising new athletic power. The galaxy would never look at the frail bipeds of Earth the same way again. As the fearsome but aging Grenetians left the stadium, Grush gazed back pensively at the prancing, jubilant humans on the podium. He realized with grim resignation that a formidable new rival had arrived, one whose awkward but indomitable bodies and spirits would perhaps one day reign ascendant over all.